we already started with Palm Sunday. We're going to get into Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and Easter Sunday. Now, this is opening the door. So my job is just to show you how you can open the door of your own soul to participate, and how you are inspired, in what way you are inspired, and what God says to you, how He speaks to you, whether within the celebration or after the celebration or later on after Easter, probably, because we will never know how God will inspire. Now, it is so important that I just present to you the way, the technique that we can engage into this Holy Week. Now, I'm going to talk about 3 aspects of this whole celebration that probably that we need to keep in mind as we enter into this celebration. One is about remembrance and reenactment. That will be one area that we will be looking into. The other one, we will be looking into the narrative and the symbols that are found throughout this 1 week of celebration. Then we will also look into the faith part of it, and then how can we participate, in what manner can we participate, and what will be the indication that we are actually participating well, because the more we engage into the celebration, the more we are involved in the celebration, the more that God will reveal to you. Now, the content of His revelation is left to you, but the dynamics of the revelation, how it reveals, how it happens, probably I can give you some indications. Now, there could be many more other ways of getting into the celebration. Suppose these 3 aspects that we will be looking into are quite sufficient for us to engage well with the liturgy of the Passion Week. Now, we will look into this remembrance and reenactment. Now, this we have 2 words. Now, in our modern mind, whenever we talk about memory, remembrance, recalling, we speak in terms of a mental faculty. That means something goes into our mind, and what stays in our mind, what stays normally in our mind are events. We can know that something happens in a certain period of time. We can locate in our mind. Sometimes when we talk about remembrance, we talk about remembering information. So those who are involved in teaching, those who are involved in lecturing, those who are involved in studies, probably it's very important for them to remember data, information, to speak about data. In the olden traditions, in the Hebrew traditions, and also in the Greek tradition, remembering that the Old Testament is written in the Hebrew language, and in the New Testament is written in the Greek language. Now, the cultural context, the way they look at things, the way they perceive life is rather different than the way we modern people perceive life. Now, in olden days, in those days, remembrance in the Hebrew mindset, in their culture, it's always the ability to reproduce the very act of God. And normally remembrance is not a mere kind of recalling information, or probably recalling the mere events that took place in the past. Of course, that is part of the act of recalling. Now, for them, is this remembrance is closely connected. One, they connected with human events, very well connected with the human events. Something happens to people, but when it is connected with God, now there's 2 things. Once it's connected with human beings, it is a normal event that has taken place in the chronological time. We can locate it back and say that in 19 92, for example, something happened. We can locate it in time frame. Now, that is the human perspective. Like we can also locate it like 3 days ago, something happened to me. I can remember that event. There's something that is of the past and it's over. But the repercussion and the effects of the event is still in my mind in terms of memories. Now, as long as human, at that level of human memories, it remains of recalling the past. Now, when the Hebrew connect this remembrance in relation to God and God's event in history, now what happens is that they kind of transcend the historical time, which we will later will know is a chronological time, eventful time, into something that is God making it happen. Because the time frame of God is not chronological. A certain elements, it runs on the aspect of eternity. It will always exist. And then it's a bit more of a difficult concept for us to understand because they're so engrossed into the human time, chronological time. Now, in the Hebrew, in the Greek language, they will call as the kairos time, a time of opportunity, a time where God reveals himself. Now, when this memory is connected with the time of God, which is a kairos time rather than chronos time, that event is somewhat, it's happening without being blocked or without being confined within the historical aspect. It's not confined within the space. It's somehow happening all the time. In other words, I think that's the closest that probably I can come to. Now, with that kind of an idea, when something that they really want to remember, like for example, that is very significant in the life of Israel, is this whole of the Exodus that took place. Now, the Exodus, it's so important, so relevant, so much so it has left a strong impact in the lives of the Israelites that God has intervened, once and for all, intervened in the lives of the people. Now, that event of intervention, historically, at the level of chronological, it happened. But they want to remember the event at the kairos level and the God's time. Now, that is how the liturgy of the Hebrew people transcend the time. In terms of whenever they celebrate, they enter into the space of God, all right? It is replicated. The events is real now happening then. Now we can see this whole sense when we begin to read the book of the Exodus. Now, like for example, in the scripture, you find it that in Genesis chapter 40, verse 14, the aspect of remembrance or remembrance in order to act in that sense as of a human level is spoken in relation to Joseph. Joseph tells Pharaoh's chief butler. Now, Joseph, you know, has stranded in Egypt, and he received, and he's known as a dreamer, an interpreter of a dream. So he was managed to interpret a dream for Pharaoh. Now, Joseph tells the chief butler, I said, remember me when it shall be well with you, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, because he sent the message through this chief butler to Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. Now, Joseph has used the word remembrance, remember. Now, this word remember, in other words, it's not that the butler remember where he got the information. When Joseph said, remember me, in other words, he says that when you tell Pharaoh about this whole story, this whole interpretation, tell Pharaoh that there was this man there in the prison, okay, who gave me the information. And not only that, that you come back and bail me out from this situation. Now that is what the act of remembrance is all about. Remember not only the information, but come back and take me out. So the action and the remembrance go side by side. So to remember is also to act, to get something done. Now this comes at the level of God remembering things. Now in Exodus 2:24, you have this important text in the whole of Exodus that God heard their groaning in reference to the Israel crying out to God. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Now this whole act of remembrance cause God to act, and God acted by saving the people. It's just not a mere remembrance, but that act of remembrance must be followed by action. Now, next we have in Exodus 12:14. These are instances, these are examples for you to see. There are numerous examples of remembrance. I just take three to show how the Hebrew people think about things, remember about things. Now, this one says, "This day shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord. Throughout your generation, you shall observe it as an ordinance forever." Now, the most interesting part of it is that the remembrance is, they want to keep, there are two things is here. One, they want constantly remember how God works or acted in their life, especially the whole story of Exodus. From Exodus came all this Passover meal, and the Passover meal later on Jesus celebrated as a Lord's Supper. You must remember the whole sequence of event and sequence of the celebration. That's one thing very important. Now, for something to remember, and when they want to pass on the traditions of remembrance of an experience, of an event, the human beings have devised a ritual. Now, ritual are not mere ritual. Ritual is very rich and significant, symbolic, and it has got a very unique language. That actually, the language of the liturgy is it's beyond reason. In other words, it's very symbolic and open and imaginative, creative, and in certain ways, using reasons alone to get the whole meaning of the liturgy is quite impossible. You need to enter with certain level of certain imagination and creativity in order to get into this whole liturgy. So what we do is that the Israelites, they want to remember this whole thing. So they have devised two things. Their preoccupation is in fact two things. One is that they need to transmit or pass over this experience to the next generation. That's their strong preoccupation. They want their children to know how God has acted in their life. They want to pass on that tradition. Now, experience, you cannot simply tell people the experience. You actually must lead people into an experience. Because if you tell the experience, just remain at the level of information. Right? You can tell until the person says, I just don't understand. So what they have to do is that how to make the whole experience come alive. The information must be, what they have gone through has to be reproduced so that the next generation, the next people can also enter into the same experience. Now, for that very reason, they have created this whole ritual. The ritual came about is because they wanted to transmit an experience, not so much on information. All right, information, you have all the data, you just write in the paper and just pass on the information. But if you want to transmit a certain experience, I think the best way of doing it is by means of ritual. That's why the Catholic Church is so rich in rites and ritual, because the whole focus of the church is the passing on the experience of how God shows himself, how God revealed himself, how God become real in our life. That experience comes about. And this is a great gift of the Catholic Church. Now, it comes from the tradition of the Hebrew people, the Israelites. They would like to, now, whenever they want to pass on the experience to the next generation, they have the whole Passover festival celebration. Now, when they celebrate the Passover festival, they use the word remembrance, they use the word reenactment. These are the two. Now, when they remember the Lord, the event that took place in Egypt, how God has saved them, what God did to them, and because it is an experience, the whole reenactment takes place. And that's the beauty of the liturgy. The whole reenactment, it is alive, happening right there in front of them. And then when they enter into the Passover liturgy, they move from the chronological time, the time dictated by human mind, okay, like today, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, numerical time, chronological time. They move away into the time of God, time of an opportunity, which is a kairos time. Now that's what happens, how this whole thing has happened. Now, that's why they use the word remembrance, zikaron, or the Greek word would be anamnesis, in order to recall the whole thing. Now, Jesus, when he celebrated the Passover, the Jewish festival, which later we celebrate as the Lord's Supper, he brought in the whole aspect of remembrance happening just right in front of him. It's the Passover is happening to him. And when we celebrate the same thing today, it's happening because it is not, we are not into chronological time. It is not a repeated historical events. We are entering into the time zone of God, which is a kairos time. We participated in this whole a celebration of God, God's salvation happening in front of us. We walk into this time zone of God. That is the whole thing that is going to happen during the Passion Week. This is so intense, the period, because we celebrate the whole of the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist. We're going to have the cross. We're going to have the resurrection. It's so intense period. The whole thing is reenactment. It's happening in front of you. Now, this is what we have to keep in mind as we enter into the celebration. Don't be too preoccupied about the human time frame, chronological time. What we need to know is that when we enter into this whole liturgy, it's happening just in front of you. Individually, we are called to participate in this whole celebration. Now, that is what we need to keep in mind when we enter into it. Next slide. Some of the aspects of remembrance. Okay, remembrance of the past, remembrance of God's mighty deeds. What God is doing. Okay, when we enter into the time zone of God, then remembrance is an exhortation, telling people, telling others of what I have experienced. Contextual remembrance, remembering about how God has done certain things within the given context. And then remembering about active power of God, mutual remembrance. Now, the next slide is that we go into a narrative and symbols. Now, when we go to the narrative and symbols that we have in the liturgy, if you watch carefully, our liturgy is very rich, especially during the Passion Week. Now, what we have the reading. Most of the readings that we find it's in the form of a dialogue. The narrative that we have is in a dialogue form, right? Can we have the slides on narrative and symbol? So we have the the church would like to produce the whole thing, replicate the whole thing, as if it is in a kind of what we call it. I used this word last week, theodrama, the drama of God, God's drama. It's happening in front of you. It's a theological drama. Church would like to produce that, and part of the liturgy that we have is the Passion narrative, in a more of, rather than being very one reader reading it or the priest reading it, the church prefer that you do it in a very dramatic form. And in certain churches, some allowance is given, within the liturgy, to kind of not only to narrate, but to dramatize the whole scenario as if it's happening in front of you. But the whole purpose of doing that is to pull the congregation into an experience of how God is involved, how God is actually making things happen for you. Now, you have to draw the whole congregation into this whole participatory liturgical celebration. You have this narrative. When you look at the narrative, the two focus you need to pay attention during the liturgy is this narrative, all the way that is being presented. The other one is symbol. When you look at the narrative, you pay attention to the kind of a dialogue that happens. Who speaks what Jesus is saying, how Pilate is responding, what Peter is saying, how Peter moves. Okay, after the betrayal, like for example, when Jesus got arrested in Gethsemane, and Jesus is already being on trial. Now Peter, wanted to find out what's happening to Jesus. He was there outside, and there were people, people were gathered there. Then you have got fire in front, right? And then Peter is sitting down there, and Peter, in fact, is being put to test. If you see the direction, the narrative is moving. And there were three times the people were questioning, were saying that, are you one of them? And Peter denied 3 times. Now, those are real scene is presented to you. Watch all these movements of the people. Look at the plots. Look at the turning points. Watch the turning point. Where is the turning point? And why the narrative is presenting? Think about it. Ponder upon it. And look at all the characters. Now, the characters is very important. Fulton Sheen, the Bishop of New York, passed away. Now, he has written a small teen book. It's a very good book to read. The title of the book, Characters of the Passion. He writes on Judas, a little bit on Judas, Pilate, and Peter. And he takes all this character and he looks at the character and try to look at Jesus through the eyes of this character, and how the way the characters display their responses, their attitude, the way they behave, the way they acted themselves, okay, whether boldly speaking about Christ or deny Christ or betray Christ, where they stand, how they stand. He speaks about that. Now, he would like to enter into the whole narrative of the Passion narrative through the eyes of Peter for 2 reasons. One is to look at Peter as Peter presented in the text, and how Peter, in certain terms, has failed. And not only that, when you begin to look things through the eyes of Peter, and God's eyes will be looking at you. So there are 2 things will be happening simultaneously. You look things through the eyes of Peter, at the same time, because you use the eyes of Peter to look at the Lord will look at you through the eyes of Peter. And that will help you to look at your soul and to examine yourself whether there is Peter in you or not. Now, this really, really involves a certain level of humility. Now, Ignatius of Loyola has got this meditation, and those who have gone, some of us as priests, we used to do retreat 8 days towards the end of my seminary training. I did about 30 days retreat, and the exercise that Ignatius of Loyola will make is this of 30 days of the ministry of Jesus, and then towards the end, the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The part of this exercise is that you are invited to put a lot of time, spend quite about 4 to 5 hours a day meditating. Not only meditating, I would rather use the word contemplating, because meditating a bit of using the mind at the level of rational, in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of a step-by-step approach. Contemplative is not so much of a step-by-step approach. It's creating a kind of a scene of the whole narrative, right? If it is for example, if it is a scene of the cross, just the cross in front of you, and you are there standing in front of the cross at Calvary, watching Jesus dying. All the disciples, the disciple Jesus loved was there, and Mary was there, some women there, the other disciples are not there, and you are just watching the whole scene. You reproducing in your whole imagination. Okay, now it's not imagination. In our language, we call it imagination. I would say that contemplative introspection. Contemplative introspection means you enter fully into it, and then you be part of the scene, and you identify as one person standing at the scene. Now that is not easy. That is, it's going to be a revelation. If you can do it, that's really going to be a revelation, right? So because you're going to enter into something that is really, really divine and inspiring. At the same time, it might be shocking because it's a revelation. It will reveal a lot of things about you, about yourself, and it will move you. It will keep moving you. Probably you want to see how God really wants you to see things at that particular scene. And that is very important. And we priests will go through, because one thing was very inspiring is that the experience of entering into it and to visualizing it and experiencing it as if it is happening in front of you. Now that becomes a strong experience of faith for me. And I really, it was a grace that was given to me. Now probably we can enter into that. Slowly you can enter into it. You can slowly enter into it. Ask the Spirit to guide to enter into the character. Best to know if I have such character. One thing is that we will learn to empathize with the disciple. We will learn to be empathetic towards our own self. We will learn to receive abundantly the mercy of God. We will be able to recognize the weakness, the limitation I have, and we don't have to be afraid of that, because the grace and the forgiveness of God is so strong, very, very powerful and strong, and that is very redeeming, very salvific. You can be saved by that, because God will really, really embrace us, just the way that He has embraced Peter. You must remember this. The way that He has embraced Peter is so important for us. Our God will not look into our failures. Our failures is for us to learn. Okay? For God, it's us, and we have to receive His mercy. Now, other things that probably you can look into it a bit more in the mind level. Okay, look at some of the concepts, some of the ideas that comes about, looking at all those things and ponder upon it. I look at some of the quotation of the Old Testament that we have. Normally is a strong text, the Bible text that we will use the book prominent in this whole Passion narrative is text taken from Isaiah, especially from chapter 40 onward. And chapter 40 onward, right up to chapter 55 is what we call as the second Isaiah. It's the focus is on the Messiah, okay? The Messiah, the suffering servant text. They will use very strongly during these things, this whole Passion Week. Then you look at some of those emotions and sentiments. Now, our faith, it's not only intellectual. It's not the mind looking for meaning. It shouldn't be that alone. Our faith has to be relational. Now, what builds relation? It's a certain level of emotions, a certain level of feeling and affinity that we should have with God. And we need to bring that that part of us strong into our faith. Now, it's okay sometimes during this Holy Week in your own space, in your own time, you want a quiet time, you spend some quiet time to look at it. And if you feel like overwhelmed by what happens to Christ, it's okay to feel sad about it. It's okay to feel a bit emotional about it. That's okay. Because I think it has to affect that part of us, right? It shouldn't be remaining at the level of intellect. Right? It should touch a certain level of emotions, a certain level of feelings that you should have towards the Lord, because that is relational, that is building. The other one probably that we can look is that viewpoints, to look at how Peter viewed him, how Judas look at him, how a chief priest looking at it, without making any judgment, but bringing out the weaknesses, looking at the weaknesses without making any judgment of the weaknesses, right? Just look at it and then identify those things whether I too have the same thing. And when you recognize that, you too do not have to make judgment on that. You just allow the grace to come in. The grace knows what to do. The grace of forgiveness, the grace of setting you free, the grace of redeeming you. He knows what to do. That one is God's work. You just allow God to work on you. You don't have to. You just open the door, open your soul, open your mind to God. That is quite sufficient for the liturgy. Now, the next thing that you probably will have during this time is the next thing you have is symbols. You go to the symbol. Now, when you look at the symbol, you just watch those symbols that you have. Jerusalem and the location, Jerusalem, Gethsemane, Golgotha, Calvary, empty tomb. These are the locations. Watch the movement of the location. Where is what is happening? Because this will actually help you to be actively involved in the narrative. The narrative has to be part of you. You have to allow the narrative to produce or to live an experience for you. And watch these things very carefully. The material that we use, palm, cross, when the narrative says about the curtain of the temple, torn from top to bottom, all right? And then the Easter candle, water, fire, bread, wine. Watch. When you begin to be more attentive, it will increase your participation. Donkey, people, the disciple, apostles, women, high priests, scribes, soldiers, pilot thieves, and others, the symbolic acts like washing of feet, the kiss, Judas' kiss of betrayal. Just listen to this attentively, pay attention to this. The next level that we can go, the third one, is that faith and participation. We have the remembrance and reenactment, narrative and symbols. Now we go to faith and participation. Now I would invite you, okay, to get into the whole liturgy as if you are a participant of this, and it's happening in front of you, right? And what we need is just focus. Don't get distracted. Sometimes, in the church during the liturgy, we want to perfect the liturgy. We want to do everything right. And sometimes too many movements, too many of this and that. It disturbs people, and it disturbs people entering fully into prayer. I understand that. I truly understand that. Sometimes maybe it's good for us just to close the eyes a bit. Once in a while, if you feel like this, right, just close your eyes, okay, and tune your mind and tune your ears to the words that is being spoken. Just tune it, right? Tune it to the sounds around you. Just feel it. Just feel it at the level of allow the word to sip slowly into it. Just close your eyes. Probably it will help a little bit on your concentration. Then participation, take it a bit more personally. I know it is a community celebration. It's a celebration of everyone. But we need to take things personally and look at Jesus. And this Jesus who died on the cross, he died for you and for me personally. It's for me, Robert, I'm doing this. It is personally for you that Jesus is doing it. Take it very personally. It's your God. It's your God who's personally have come and personally would like to involve with you. And he is a communitarian God, but he is also working personally in your life. And this is so important. Take things personally. And don't worry about your husband, don't worry about children, right? They have to be responsible for their faith. And you take it personally and you draw personally from this whole liturgy. You draw for yourself. Okay? Don't get distracted with children, with your spouses, or the people around them. Let them, they have to be accountable for themselves. You have to take for yourself personally. The other one is recognition. This recognition is relational identification. Identify yourself. As I said earlier, during the narrative, you can look at your whole life through Peter or through Jesus or through high priest. Through their eyes, you can enter into it. Now, the correlation spirituality, it's you by relating and receiving, by giving and taking. Now, the more you are focused, the more you are participatory, the more you recognize, you will learn to give much, a lot. And in return, you will receive. Now, sometimes we don't realize what we have received. Now, the impact of having received, for example, the impact of the grace or the blessing or the experience that you receive through this whole celebration might bear fruits later. It may not bear fruits then and then, or even after the liturgy, or maybe after a few days. It might even produce much later, after about a week or 2 weeks. Suddenly you realize that it is actually coming from what you have done during the liturgy. I hope that it will leave a certain impact or certain grace or certain blessing to you as you truly involve by participating and focusing. The other one is that throughout this 1 week, maybe we should take some time now pondering deeply. I used to say these things very often, right? Pondering deeply enough that it leaves a certain level or certain mark on our soul. That's not a bad mark, or something that is graceful, something that is powerful, that probably might even change for better. Not that change, we always think about change is that change from a bad habit to a good habit. It's not necessary. A change is that change, it's so gracious and gracefulness. And that itself is, we can say, change, right? So we have to think over, dwell over, sleep with it, and to be fully involved. To participate in the liturgy, you need to have all this involvement that take place all the time so that you can draw a lot more from the liturgy. So it has to be throughout the day. You need to keep your thoughts, your mind along the line of, it's not that suddenly you come into the liturgy, you can just switch on and switch off. It doesn't work. It doesn't leave a mark behind. Definitely doesn't leave a mark behind. But if you're throughout the day, you're thinking and you're pondering about it, you're reflecting about it, and you come and participate, it will definitely leave some kind of a mark behind. You fall along that line of thoughts. Now, the other one is that know the reason. Now, this is more in terms of the whole orientation of the liturgy, is this, that the whole thing is happening for you, for your own liberation, for your own salvation, for you to have grace and blessing. Now, this is an article of faith, a strong faith that this God is making this whole thing, causing these things to happen for me and for my salvation, for my freedom, and God is there with me. That kind of a conviction. The reason that we talk about is the reason that is a strong conviction. Earlier, we talked about focus. Earlier, we talked about a kind of an imagination to enter into it. Then we talk about pondering deeply, recognition. Now, this one, it's a level of conviction. Conviction is an utter belief that I'm convinced that my God is doing all these things for me and for my salvation. When we have such a spirit during this whole Passion Week, I strongly believe that the Spirit will move us in the right direction. The Spirit will move us into the direction of God. The Spirit will move us into an experience, a true experience. That probably there will be a new revelation. Now, what that revelation is all about, what kind of a blessing, what kind of a grace, what kind of what sort of a change that God will create, I will leave that to God. We will just get involved in this whole thing and then leave the rest of it to God. And I pray for all of you and for all our parishioners that we will have a blessed experience, that God in all his graciousness will bless us. And let us have a blessed Paschal feast. God bless all of you.
We thank Father Robert Daniel for giving us this practical and insightful methods on how we can really participate in this Paschal feast in a meaningful manner. We thank him, and we also thank all of you for joining us in this talk. And good night, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. Bye-bye.